wanted to ask you the number of persons that are being housed in private properties in which the owner is in receipt of the recognition payment, if you'd provide an update on the number of pledged properties which have been deemed suitable for the placement of a person or family from Ukraine, the number of people that have been placed in pledged accommodation to date, and if you make a statement on the matter.
So since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine on the 24th of February and the invoking of the Temporary Protection Directive by the European Union shortly afterwards, my department has worked intensively as part of the cross-government response to the Ukraine crisis. The operational challenges brought about by responding to the conflict are significant. Our country has never experienced an influx of displaced persons like the one we have seen over the past number of months. My department is focused on the immediate short-term accommodation needs of those who fled here. So to date, more than 53,000 Ukrainians have arrived in Ireland, and around 41,500 of those have been referred to my department seeking accommodation from the state. Overseeing provision of accommodation on this scale during this time frame for all those who require it does remain very challenging, and due to the urgent need to source accommodation, a broad range of accommodation types have been contracted. The priority is to place people fleeing the conflict in safe and secure accommodation. The government is committed to delivering a humanitarian response to welcome people seeking protection in Ireland as part of the European Union's overall response. And the scale of response to this crisis has been unprecedented. The Irish people have displayed an incredible level of generosity in their support and their pledges of accommodation. So I can advise the Deputy that as of week ending the 2nd of October, the recognition payment was being paid in respect of 2,870 properties accommodating 6,148 beneficiaries of temporary protection. And of those, I think about 4,500 are through the pledge process. But we were also very clear that people who are accommodating Ukrainians who maybe hadn't gone through the official pledge process would also be supported as well. So we've left it as open as possible. So 4,500 people accommodated through the pledge process, more than 10% of the overall population of Ukrainians accommodated here. So it's a huge support to our department's accommodation efforts.
Thank you very much, Minister. Yeah, it's been a huge number of people to accommodate in an incredibly short time frame, and I think we lose sight of that at times. Of course, we're right to expect a government response, but it has only been since February, and it's been an incredible influx of people. And I think it's fair to say that the structures that were created to deal with much smaller numbers of people were overwhelmed. And you did acknowledge that Irish people have shown an incredible level of generosity, and they absolutely have. I mean, we've opened our hearts, we've opened our communities, and many people offered to open their doors. And it is fair to say that there was a level of frustration from people who did pledge accommodation, that maybe they were contacted repeatedly and contacted with the same questions, or maybe they were contacted and then kind of left out in the cold. And so is that something that we need to look at, and is there more there to be unlocked, because unfortunately this isn't a crisis where we can see the end in sight just yet?
Well, the war in Ukraine has generated the biggest movement of population on the European continent since the Second World War. And obviously it happening miles from us. Sometimes we forget that, but that is the scale of what we're doing. There's 1.2 million people in Poland, 800,000 people in Romania, in Hungary, 450,000 in Czechia. I was speaking to the commissioner from Czechia recently. So it's had a huge impact in Ireland. And Ireland's numbers, compared to some of those countries, are small, 53,000 at this stage, but in a smaller country, and particularly where we do have an ongoing housing crisis, that has put us under real pressure. And you're right in terms of the operation of the pledge process. It wasn't perfect. By far it was not perfect at the start. But right now, 4,500 people are being accommodated in the properties across the country. As I say, more than 10%, a hugely, hugely important support to the state's efforts to meet the needs of Ukrainians.
I absolutely acknowledge that, Minister, and I think it's a huge commitment for somebody to open their doors to give that kind of shelter to family. It has to be acknowledged, and there is a recognition payment, but of course it has to be acknowledged more than just through money. But Minister, you yourself referenced that it's your department's job to respond to the short-term needs and pledged accommodation isn't a long-term solution. You know, for somebody to have that generosity over 4, 5, 6 months, that's some undertaking. I don't think we can expect it over a 5-year period. So are we beginning to plan for long-term solutions here as well as the short-term solutions? Because unfortunately, we don't see an end in sight in terms of the conflict. And also we have to acknowledge that many of the people who've travelled here from Ukraine, they've now got their children in school, they may have begun working within the economy, and that's all very welcome, and they may not be going home. And are we beginning to set plans in place for that?
Just on the
point you make and the point Deputy Kostelik make is an important one in terms of looking to the medium and the long term and the level of supports that will be needed for the Ukrainian community here. And that's going to be a key element in the next Cabinet subcommittee that we'll be discussing, looking to put in place those medium to long term plans, recognising that I know many European countries are also doing the same, recognising that the war is ongoing. The attacks on civilian targets continue and have actually gotten worse. We've seen over the last number of weeks, and Ireland and all European countries need to be recognising that the consequences and the humanitarian consequences for all our countries are going to be over a longer period of time, and we need to prepare for that.